Michael and Robin were business owners, and I do understand that our next presentation, which is Cary 150 History Moment, has to do with business. Is that correct, Mr. Yerha?
It is indeed. It seems
All right.
very appropriate.
Thank you.
The topic is Cary means business. And we're going to look at some of Cary's early businesses and a few others along the way. Cary's first businessman was John Bradford. He was a tavern owner with a lot of land and a rather spotty reputation. Bradford became a landowner in Cary as early as 1760, and he opened what was called an ordinary on the location of the current town hall. The ordinary served as a place where travelers and locals could eat, drink, and find shelter. Bradford was very active in public affairs until he disappeared from the public records in 1801 after losing a lawsuit which was brought on by several neighbors over some unpaid debts. Following the Civil War, in an explosion of interest in tobacco in North Carolina, Frank Page, Cary's founder, opened his tobacco factory. It was by far the largest building in town, and it sat where the Fire Administration Building is located today, near the intersection of Cedar and Academy. You can make it out, I hope, on that map. There's no evidence that the building, however, ever saw a single tobacco leaf, because the 1873 Depression hit Cary just as the construction on the building was completed. And the building was sold that same year and later housed a grist mill, a print shop, a post office, and even a church on the third floor. You could say it was Cary's first multi-use development. It later burned in the fire of 1908. After Frank Page left town in the 1880s, the most prominent businessman was Robert J. Harrison, whom Page had mentored. Harrison arrived in Cary and started the North Carolina Plow Company, which was later renamed the Harrison Wagon Company, on the northeast corner of Harrison and Academy. There's an historic marker there today. His business grew to become one of Wake County's largest industries in the 1890s. And after retiring from his manufacturing business, Harrison stayed in Cary and spent his last working days running a cafe on the corner of Academy and Chatham, where Ashworth Drug now stands. His cafe was known as Uncle Bob's Corner, and that's pictured there on the left-hand slide, and became a very popular hangout for students from the original Cary Academy. Frank Page's idea for a hotel may have been shaped by the shanty shelter that he had to build for passengers waiting for trains, as Page was the agent and the biggest supporter of a train stop in Cary. Records show that in 1871, the sidetrack at the stop consisted of a water pump, a tank, and a warehouse, and the warehouse included a passenger waiting room and a ticket room. Announcing the plans for the new hotel, the Raleigh Christian Advocate described it as a most delightful place for summer resort for our eastern friends. And architecturally, it was very elaborate for a whistle-stop town like Cary. When Page left town in the 1880s, he sold his hotel to Jacob Walker for $3,000, along with 3 acres of land. Under Walker's ownership, the hotel became Cary's best-known business at the turn of the century. Mr. and Mrs. Walker were beloved members of the community, and after Mr. Walker's death, Helen Walker turned the hotel into apartments and a rooming house. The building then would change hands several times, and due to the efforts of the Friends of the Page Walker and the town of Cary in the 1980s and 90s, the building was restored to its current condition and is now, of course, the Page Walker Arts and History Center. Interesting to note that for Cary's first 50 years, Cedar Street, which was known then as Railroad Street, was Cary's main business street. But in 1920, the new Western Wake Highway ran down the newly paved Chatham Street, and soon Chatham replaced Cedar as Cary's premier business address. And for much of the first half of the 20th century, a large part of the commercial land in Cary was owned by one family, the Gray family. But after 1945, Cary experienced changes in its central business district that had a tie to a wartime romance. Because due to a social visit to Cary from Raleigh, Sergeant Vroom Roscoe, I love that name, his first name is Vroom. Vroom Roscoe fell in love with the Baptist church pianist Eugenia Gray. The couple got married, they settled in Delaware, and this move prompted the Gray family to auction off all of their downtown property. And after the property sale, Cary Business District flourished. Paul Chandler built Cary's first movie theater on East Chatham. The building was the first new building in downtown Cary in over 15 years. The building then became a clothing store, the Chatham Street Auto Parts, and of course today it's back to a movie theater. Continuing on East Chatham, John Catronis built a structure to house multiple businesses, including his shoe shop, and a washerette, that's another name I like, a washerette, and a drugstore opened by Kenneth Franklin. The drugstore was bought by Wayne Mitchell in 1956 and became Mitchell's Pharmacy, which operated there until 1993. We know it today, of course, as the Pharmacy. Continuing down the street, Henry Adams erected a building in 1952, using half for his appliance store. The other half was leased to the Cary branch of the Bank of Fuquay. The Bank of Fuquay later became Fidelity and eventually bought the entire block. The Bank of Fuquay was the first financial institution in Cary since 1931, when the Bank of Cary folded, and that's a story for another day. The next ribbon cutting in this period was for the first supermarket, a Piggly Wiggly, that opened in 1950. The Piggly Wiggly was housed in the building where La Farm is now located, and the site was also home at one time to Glenn Hobby's television and appliance business. The arrival of the Piggly Wiggly was really a sign of growth, but it wasn't welcomed by all. The Rogers family, who owned the local grocery store, couldn't keep up with the supermarket's low prices. Thus, Lemuel Rogers stopped selling groceries and he went into the hospitality business, becoming the proprietor of Rogers Restaurant and Motel, a staple stop in Cary for tourists and truckers. Another local grocery store that was affected by the arrival of the Piggly Wiggly was the Denning family store. The Dennings started selling groceries on West Chatham in 1941 and then tried their hand at their own supermarket, the Grocery Boys, in 1964. The store was located in 122 West Chatham, which used to house Creative Images, you may remember. The name Grocery Boy carried on as the Dennings opened up a convenience store model in Raleigh called the Grocery Boy Jr. It was one of the first convenience stores in all of Wake County. It grew to a chain of 12 stores and was owned by the Dennings' son. Since we mentioned the Rogers Restaurant and Motel, it seems appropriate to talk about the history of the building. The restaurant was originally opened on East Chatham in the 1950s. In 1961, Lemuel Rogers bought the property at 149 East Chatham and moved the restaurant and motel there, expanding it to 7 rooms and adding an apartment. It was sold to his son and daughter-in-law, Billy and Barbara Rogers, in 1966. Billy and Barbara ran the motel and opened their doors to all. It became a meeting place for Cary town leaders. In fact, it's been said that more town decisions were made there than at Town Hall. It was demolished earlier this year for the development of Rogers West and East. The new development will pay homage to the well-known name of its past owners. The only building at the intersection of Chatham and Academy that still remains from 1945 is the Masonic Building that houses Ashworth Drugstore. In 1945, the building housed 4 businesses. On the first floor was the Adams Drugstore and Lemuel Rogers Grocery Store. Upstairs was the Lodge Hall itself and Lucille Batts's Beauty Shop. The Ashworths bought the building in 1977 after buying Henry Adams Drugstore in 1957. Ralph and Daphne arrived in Cary from Fuquay Varina looking for one of the town's 2 drugstores that had been advertised for sale. As the story goes, and I'm sure Ralph can give us more details on this one, they walked into Adams Drugstore and asked if it was for sale. Mr. Adams responded, "Nope, but I'll sell it to you." And at that point, a Cary business legend was born. Harry Stevenson was a high school classmate of Ralph and Daphne in Fuquay, and he moved to Cary and noticed that all the oil that heated the homes was delivered from companies in Raleigh. And after talking with potential customers and getting a $1,500 bank loan from Fuquay, Stevenson bought his first oil delivery truck in the fall of 1959. He drove it himself during the day, and he kept his job at night as a radio announcer. The one-man oil delivery service was the beginning of the Cary Oil Company, later to become one of North Carolina's largest petroleum marketers. But self-service gas pumps were really what took Cary Oil to the next level and kept it successful throughout the years. Stevenson's innovation of self-service gas pumps was a direct result of his visit to Carolina Builders in Raleigh, which registered the amount of fuel used by each of their drivers during a fill-up. So with the consent of Joe Denning of Grocery Boys, Stevenson installed these pumps, and that was the first beginning of self-service gas stations in North Carolina. Another business that's been a staple in our community in the construction industry is J.M. Thompson. It's an honor for Cary to celebrate its 150th anniversary, along with J.M. Thompson, which is celebrating its 100th anniversary this very year. The company was founded by John Marvin Thompson, who moved from Bahama to Raleigh in 1921. Thompson grew from a small business to one of the region's largest home builders. Between 1945 and 1971, Taylor Biscuit Company was the most significant new industry in Cary. In 1947, it was the town's largest employer. Now known as Austin Quality Foods, it's still one of the largest employers. The company moved from its original building in 1988 to Weston Industrial Park. Then we have Heater Well Company, which started as Heater Drilling Company, which we know was in existence as early as 1921. Russell Heater was also known as Mr. Cary, borrowed some of his father's equipment to start the drilling company. The company did well in the 20s, went bankrupt in 1931 along with a lot of other people, and then reorganized as Heater Well Company. And by 1940, it was the largest well drilling firm in the Carolinas. In 1933, Durham Life Insurance Company bought 138 acres on East Chatham Street through a foreclosure sale. In addition to a building, they erected a 325-foot transmission tower for its radio station, WPTF. Completed in 1934, the tower allowed for a boost in transmission and enabled the transmitter on the Sir Walter Hotel in Raleigh to be closed. The building may be small in size, but actually has underground office space that enabled announcers to broadcast through storms. Although there are no longer shows being broadcast from the building, the towers still function, and the building itself is an historic preservation treasure. Then we had the doctors, Dr. Yarborough and Dr. Hunter. They were the two most prominent doctors in Cary in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. Dr. Yarborough's office, which has separate entrances, and that's the building you see in the lower left, had separate entrances for white and black patients, which was customary in those days. But inside was an integrated waiting room, which was not customary for those days. And it still stands on Academy Street as a private residence. Dr. Hunter's residence, in the upper right-hand corner, is a Cary landmark on 311 South Academy Street. And his office was across the street in a building that later housed the Cary Public Library and now is Serendipity Gourmet Deli. That was Dr. Hunter's office. And by the way, both doctors were mayors of Cary. A major turning point in the city's economic development was the direct result of the Cary economic policy of the Chamber of Commerce in 1989. Once the Chamber erected the town's economic development office, it launched a professional industrial recruitment drive and increased its support of existing Cary businesses. Outgrowing its original building, the Chamber moved to its current location on North Academy in 1993. The Chamber was growing quickly under the leadership of its president, Howard Johnson. And in my opinion, no history of Cary from now on cannot be written without a mention of Howard Johnson, who's retiring this year as Chamber President after 35 years. The first fruit of Cary's industrial recruitments was MacGregor Park. The land was assembled by Greg Poole and other investors with a vision to provide a campus-like setting for high-tech industries. After MacGregor came Regency Park, which was developed by three Canadians, Ed Woolner and the Solomon Brothers. Regency Park was the city's largest taxpayer at one time. Following behind Regency was Weston, which was a mixture of industrial sites, office parks, and residential areas. And of course, we can't conclude the presentation without mentioning SAS Institute Incorporated, officially chartered on July 1st, 1976, by Dr. Goodnight and John Saul. In 1980, SAS moved from Hillsborough Street to the North Harrison location. Known for its workplace culture, it's often ranked as one of the best companies to work for in the United States. Since 1976, the Cary campus has grown to 300 acres in at least 24 buildings. And there is so much more. There's South Hills Mall, there's Cary Town Center, Crossroads, MetLife, our hospitals, our banks, the Maiden Inn, in Fenton, for example. Not to mention countless smaller businesses like France Automotive, pictured in the center of the second row. Simply, we can't just mention them all, but we are so grateful to all those who invest in our community, a community in a great position to thrive for another 150 years, a community like no other. I'd like to acknowledge Around and About Cary, the book that provides a lot of info for us for these presentations, Matthew Champagne from the Page Walker History Center, and of course, Ginny Johnson. And I ask for you to visit www.cary150.org for more information on Cary's 150th anniversary. That's it for tonight.
That was great, Ed.
Yeah,
Thank you.
excellent.
I really enjoyed that.